Today we're going to look at lesson 8.6, factoring a trinomial with a lead coefficient greater than 1. So same idea as what we did yesterday. We can factor a trinomial with something in front of the squared term that is bigger than 1. Okay, but remember, anytime we are factoring, our first and most important step is always look for a GCF. Okay, so that's always our first step. Sometimes we might have one, sometimes we might not, but that is always our first step. So if my first problem is 2x squared plus x minus 1, and the directions say to factor completely, looking for GCF is always going to be what we do. So I see that I've got numbers, technically there's a 1 here and there's a 1 at the end. The moment that I have a polynomial that has at least one number 1, I know that that's the biggest number that I'm going to be able to take out of those terms. And if I take out a 1, that's not going to change any of the numbers. So they don't have a number in common. If I look at all of the terms, I see that there's an x squared, so 2x's in the first term. There's an x, so 1 in the middle term, but then I don't have any variables at the end. So it doesn't look like they all have a variable either. So we checked, but there is no GCF. And so because there is no GCF and I still have this number in front of my x squared, this is when we have to think about the whole guess and check process. So the nice thing about the number in front is that there's only one way to multiply to 2. It's 1 times 2. I look at then the last number and I see a 1. Well, there's only one way to multiply to 1. That's 1 times 1. So when I'm doing my guessing, remember, factoring means we have two things being multiplied together, or maybe more than two things, but definitely it's multiplication. So that's why I want to create then parentheses where I know because the x squared term is going to have a 2 and a 1 in front. So I'm going to have a 2x and essentially a 1x. You can put the 1 with the x, you can just write it as an x. That takes care of the first term. I know that I'm going to multiply to 1, so I'm going to have a 1 and a 1. Notice that my sign is really that I'm multiplying to a negative, but I need to add to the middle term of a positive, okay? So I need to try to get the middle term to be a positive 1. Well, if I'm multiplying to a negative 1, that means that one of those ones is really a negative and one of those is positive. So now this is where the guessing comes in. I have to guess which one of those is going to be negative. So let's just guess the first one is negative and the second one is positive. Once I've done my guessing, now I have to do my checking. So that's where I have to check to see if I'm really going to get that positive 1x in the middle. So to do that, we multiply the outer terms together. So I multiply 2x times positive 1 to get me a positive 2x. Then I have to multiply the inner terms together. So the negative 1 gets multiplied by x, and that gives me negative 1x. If I add those two terms, because these are like terms, they both have an x, notice negative 1 plus 2 is going to give me that positive 1. When I combine like terms, I do not add exponents, so the x stays as it is. Because that 1x is exactly what I want to see, because that's the middle term, we know that we guessed correctly, so then I can go ahead and I can circle that. That is my final answer. I don't have to go any further. If I look at the second example, we have 4x squared minus 11x minus 3. So once again, we always look for a GCF first. So I'm looking and I see, as far as my numbers are concerned, 3 is the smaller number. Can I multiply 3 times something to get 4? The answer is no. So right off the bat, I can't break down the 3 any smaller because it's a prime number. The only way to multiply to 3 is 1 times 3. So obviously they all have a 1 in common, but that's not going to change anything. So because they don't all have a 3 in common, I don't have a number for a GCF. If I look at my terms, they don't all have a variable. So once again, I've scanned, but there is no GCF. So then now I want to look at the first number again, because that tells me that I can multiply 1 times 4 to get 4 or 2 times 2. So this time we are going to have a little bit more guessing on our hands. If I look at the last number, it's 1 times 3. Like I said, it's a prime number, so there's less guessing to go there. There's only one way to multiply. So remember, we want to factor, which means that our final answer should be multiplication. And we have to guess, do I want to try the 1 and the 4, or do I want to try the 2 and the 2? I think I will start with the 1 and the 4. So one of my beginning parentheses has to be a 4x, and one of them has to be a 1x. Then I know that I'm going to have to put the 1 and the 3 for my remaining numbers. So how do I want to do that? Well, I'm going to guess, okay, well, let's put the 3 first and the 1 second. And notice how there is a negative sign. That means one of these has to be positive and one of these has to be negative. Well, let's put the positive first and the negative second. So there's our guessing, but now I have to check. Notice that my middle term is negative 11x. That's what I want it to turn into. So I have to multiply the outside terms together. 4x times negative 1 is a negative 4x. And notice that the 3 and the x get multiplied together to 3x. So if I combine those like terms, 3x plus negative 4x, that's only going to give me a negative 1x. That's not the term in the middle. So notice that we got a negative, so that's good, but we didn't get the right number. So we just didn't guess correctly. So that means we have to try again. So remember, I don't erase anything if I guessed incorrectly. I just go to another spot on my paper and I try it again. I am going to keep the 4x and the 1x, but I think I'm going to switch the 3 and the 1 around. So I'm going to have now a positive 1 first and then a negative 3 second. So I kept the signs the same. I just changed the 1 and the 3. So we did our guessing. Now let's do our checking. So notice that I multiply the outside terms together. 4x times negative 3 is negative 12x. Then I multiply the inside terms together. Well, 1 times x is a 1x. I add those like terms. And notice that this time, 1x plus negative 12x gives us negative 11x. That's what I wanted because that's what's in the middle. So this is the answer that I'm going to circle. Okay, so it might take you more than one guess, and that's perfectly fine. But remember, it's called guess and check. You have to check to make sure you get that middle term, and if you don't erase, just try again. Let's take a look at letter C here. We've got 4x squared plus 14x plus 6. Okay, so once again, I got to look for a GCF. So I notice that I've got a 4 is the smallest number. Can I multiply 4 times something to get 14? And my answer is no. But 4 is not a prime number. I can break it up into 2 times 2. Can I multiply 2 times something to get 14? And the answer is yes. 2 times 7 is going to get me 14. Can I multiply 2 times something to get 6? And my answer is yes. 2 times 3. So while 4 was a number that they didn't all have in common, notice how they all have a 2 in common. They don't all have a variable because the 6 doesn't have a letter. So that means that my GCF is going to be the number 2. So I'm going to write the 2 on the outside, and that means I still have to put whatever's left over back in parentheses. So because 4 was 2 times 2, I took out 1 2, I still have a 2, and there's still the x squared with it. I'm going to bring down that positive sign. 14 was 2 times 7. I took out the 2, I'm still left with the 7, and there's still an x in the middle. Going to bring down that addition sign. Notice that 6 is 2 times 3. I took out the 2, I'm left with the 3. All right, so if you now have 2x squared plus 7x plus 3 in the parentheses, I notice that I still have a leading coefficient. So that means that I still have to do the guess and check. We've got 2 times 1 is going to give me 2, and 1 times 3 is going to give me 3. So that GCF is still important. I'm going to bring down that GCF, but now I'm going to think about my guess and check process, but I always have to have that GCF out in front for my final answer. So like we said, because 2x squared is 1 times 2, I know that I'll start with a 2x and a 1x. So now I know that everything is positive in that trinomial. So I know that everything's going to be positive in my parentheses. I have to guess, where do I want to put the 1 and where do I want to put the 3? I'm going to guess the 1 first and the 3 second. So now I have to check to make sure that I get that middle term of 7x. So it has nothing to do with the GCF. I want to multiply the outer terms of my parentheses. So 2x times 3 is 6x. And then I multiply the inside terms. 1 times x is 1x. If I add those together, I'm going to get 7x, which is what I wanted. So notice the GCF needs to stay in my final answer. Everything else that I guessed is correct. So this whole thing would be my answer. All right, if we look at this last problem, we've got 3x to the third plus 10x squared plus 3x. So once again, we got to look for a GCF first. I see my numbers. I've got a 3, a 10, and a 3. So 2 of those terms have a 3. So can I multiply 3 times something to get 10? And the answer is no. So while several of the terms have a number in common, they don't all do. But if I look, I see that, hey, x to the third, there's x's. X squared, there's x's. X, all of them have an x. So remember, when I'm looking at my GCF, I have to take the smaller exponent. So between a 3, a 2, and technically a 1, I can only take out one x. So that's my GCF. I now need to write whatever's left over. So if I'm taking an x out of every term, we still have the 3, but now instead of x to the third, we have x squared. Plus, I still have the 10, x squared. If I took out one x, I'm still left with an x. Plus, and then we'll still have the 3, but I took out the x. So now that I have that GCF taken out, I still have a number in front of my squared term. So we got to do that guess and check. So what multiplies to 3? Well, 1 times 3. And so that happens on both ends. So I'm bringing down my GCF of x, and now I got to put my parentheses where I know I'm going to have a 3x and a 1x starting us off. Once again, every sign is positive, so I know that I'm going to have addition signs. Now I need to guess which one of those parentheses is going to have the 1 and which one's going to have the 3. I think I'm going to put the 1 first and the 3 seconds. I've done my guessing. Now I have to do my checking. I want it to turn into a 10x when I combine like terms. So if I multiply the outside terms of my parentheses, 3x times 3 is 9x. If I multiply the inside terms, 1 times x is 1x. If I add those like terms, I get 10x, which is what I'm looking for. So I know that this then was my correct guess, and so then that's my answer. So once again, always look for that GCF first. Sometimes it might not happen to be anything, but sometimes it might. And then when we have that lead coefficient, we're thinking about the guess and check process.